Hi, I'm Rachel from Just Another Button Company. Thank you for joining me for this episode of Stitch School. Today I'm going to show you how to take a quilt block and turn it into a pincushion that has boxed corners. The benefits of making a boxed corner cushion is that you don't lose any of the shape of your original quilt block. So it looks just like the regular finished block, but in pincushion form. Let me give you a peek at the side. See how I've taken and I've added borders, and the borders have become the side of the pincushion instead of stretching my quilt block flat like this to make it into a pincushion. So let's get started. All right, so I am going to get started here. I have my quilt block that I'm turning into the pincushion, and it is 6.5 inches square with a 1¼ inch border sewn around all the sides. And you can find these measurements on our blog. I've also taken my backing piece, which I made 6.5 inches square to match the size of my quilt block, and I added the same borders to my backing. So next I'm going to take one of my pieces and I'm going to put it face down, and I'm going to fold back the borders to the seam, and I'm going to use my iron to press these away from the front of the quilt block. You can see that that's going to make my side stand away from the top of the quilt block. That's going to help me later on when I put the two pieces together. So I'm going to repeat that on all 4 sides of both the front and the back pieces. Okay, I have all my edges pressed. Before I move on to the next step, I just want to mention what this white piece is here in the middle of my back. This is the quilt block, and I put some Dreamy Fusible Fleece by So Lazy on the back of my block. It's not on my borders, just on the block. And I did that because I like the look of pillows and pincushions when they have that behind the top, because it gives it a nice even stuffed look when you put the stuffing in there. It helps even it out. So I would recommend putting a square of Dreamy Fusible Fleece. You can actually fuse it directly to your block in the middle of just the top piece. And you can do that before or after you add the borders. Okay, so we have 2 6.5 inch blocks with 1¼ inch borders. And now we're going to lay them right sides together, pin them together, and then sew all the way around. We're not going to leave an opening, and I'm going to show you why in just a minute. All right, now as you can see, I've sewn 1/4 inch away from the edge all the way around, connecting my stitching. So the trick for turning my pillow right side out is I'm going to turn it to the back side, and in only the backing fabric, I'm going to pinch it to make sure that's all I have here. I'm just holding on to the backing fabric. I'm going to make a slit, and I'm going to cut this open on the diagonal. Not very wide, just enough so I can turn the pillow right side out through the slit. You can find more info on this technique on our website on the Stitch School page. It's called the Stitch technique. Okay, so I'm going to poke my corners out just a little bit, not too much, because what we're actually going to do next is create poked corners to give us a boxed corner look. Okay. So the next step is to add stuffing to the pillow. I'm just going to trim some fraying threads that were in my seam. Okay, so I'm going to flip it over and I'm going to use the same slit to add stuffing to my cushion. I'm stuffing my pincushion with wool roving. And you can find wool roving, which is our favorite stuffing, on our website. I like to fluff the roving as I'm stuffing it in because it gives it a nicer look. It doesn't end up looking lumpy. I'm going to try to fill out the whole area evenly. I'm not taking too much time to push it all the way to the edges because these borders that you see are actually going to become a straight edge. So I don't need to fill it all the way to the edge. All right, and when I'm satisfied with how firm and full my pincushion is, I'm going to turn it over and I'm going to push the sides in just a little bit because these are going to become straight sides and these are going to be pointed inward instead of outward like this. So this technique is called poke corners. I'm going to use my finger to poke this corner inside. And I'm going to try to line these two sides up. And you can see here's one seam and here's the other seam. These are from when we added our borders earlier. And they're great guides for where to fold your corners into. So now that I have those seams lined up, I'm going to use a clover clip and hold them together. So I'm going to hold those together with a clip and then I'm going to turn it to another corner and do the same thing. So I'm going to push this in and I'm going to look for my seams. Got one, but I can't see the other one yet. Here it is. Alright, so I've got one seam right here and one right here. I'm going to even these out and add a clip. It takes a little finesse to get this just right. But if you feel like you can't quite get it, you can reach inside the pillow through the slit in the back to help yourself line the corners up. And one last corner. Okay, now turn it to the front and see how it looks. All right, I'm pretty satisfied with that look. So now I'm going to hand stitch them together using a blind stitch. Okay, so I am using a single strand of thread and I matched my thread color to the fabric that are on my borders. So I'm going to put my needle in right at the seam. I'm going to tuck it in between the two sides And I'm going to come up right at the corner on one side. Pull it until my knot meets the fabric, but I'm not going to pull too tight because this is a single strand, so my knot's not that big. All right, and then I'm going to hold the two layers together with my fingers as I move my needle to the other side, and I take a small stitch. And pull it tight. Now that first stitch I can see, but because it's a matching thread color, it doesn't show as much. And then I'm going to take another stitch on the opposite side. I'm going to have to point my needle up to avoid my clip, but I don't want to take my clip off because it's keeping the rest of my sides pinched together. And then I'm back to the other side to take another stitch. My stitches are probably about 1/8 of an inch long. If you feel like your fabric is gaping between your stitches, you can always go back at the end and sew back the other direction in between your stitches. All right, now I'm going to move my clip just to the other corner. And just keep using your hands to manipulate the fabric to keep that really nice square boxed corner. And then I like to, as I'm pulling my stitches tight, pinch the fabric together just as I gently tug on my needle. Right at the seam, so this is a little tricky. I'm going to try to go under the fabric and not come out in the seam because that's going to cause a little bit of an issue with connecting the two sides. So leave the two seams touching there in the middle, but don't try to sew them together right there. Just sew right beside each seam. All right, now I'm close enough that I can just take off my clip. I'm going to tuck some of this a little further in. Okay, now I'm ready to take my last stitch, which is just going to be one little pinch at the end, and I'm going to sew through my loop to make a knot, and then I'm going to bury my knot by sewing right next to where I just made that knot, and I'm going to come out on the back. I'm going to pull it tight so that my pillow kind of bunches up, and then I'm going to get my scissors really close to the pillow without trimming the fabric. I'm going to snip my thread, and the thread tail just pops right back into the inside of the pillow. So now you can see that nice, neat, boxed corner that we created using the poke technique. This is a poke corner. So you would repeat that on all three sides. And then if you want your pillow to be a little more firm, you can add some more stuffing and then use our Franken-stitch finish technique to close the opening in the back of your pincushion. I hope you've enjoyed this episode of Stitch School, and I'd actually like to tell you that you can do this technique on any size quilt block, and you can make the sides of your cushion any size that you want. All you have to do is decide how wide you want your sides, and then divide it by 2 and add seam allowances on both sides. Make sure you put a border on the quilt block and on the backing, and then you will end up with a beautiful boxed cushion.